Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith have struck a major new pipeline agreement that could reshape Canada's energy landscape. The two leaders signed a memorandum of understanding outlining federal support for a privately financed project that would move up to 1 million barrels of oil a day from Alberta to a Pacific export terminal, opening the door to expand access to Asian markets and setting off significant political reaction in Ottawa.
The Canadian government will enable a clear and efficient approval process for a new private sector constructed and financed pipeline, priority to Asia, and a pipeline with Indigenous peoples' co-ownership and benefits. And by working with the new cooperation agreement, which is part of the MOU, we will maximize the benefits of one project, one review for the Alberta portions of any projects. The pipeline will transport at least 1 million barrels of low-emission Alberta bitumen a day, with a route that increases access to new Asian markets as a priority. This enhanced capacity would be on top of a further expansion of Trans Mountain by an additional 300,000 to 400,000 Alberta barrels per day.
A lot to unpack here and a lot of political stakes for both Ottawa and Alberta. Joining me now is our contributor, David Clement, to break down what this deal really means. So, David, what exactly did Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith really agree to?
So we have pipeline development. So you're looking at exporting 300 to 400,000 additional barrels per day to Asian markets. The process is the province will have until July 2026 to submit a proposal to Ottawa that will fit in the kind of Building Canada Act streamlined program that Carney has put forward. And it also includes a potential alteration to BC's tanker ban. We have a regulation exemption for Alberta on emissions, electricity emissions. So essentially, Alberta is exempt. There were emission standards that were supposed to be implemented by 2035. Alberta now gets to shift that to 2050, which is their commitment. And then we have an agreement on carbon capture. So through the Pathways Alliance, basically a program to engage in carbon capture to try and lower emissions as exports increase.
And why is this deal being framed as such a major shift in Canada's energy landscape?
Well, I mean, it's pretty significant politically because it's a complete reversal from what we had for 9 years, right? This would have been unthinkable in 2019. And so it's a complete shift in the policy direction. I'd also argue that it's a return of kind of collaborative federalism, because so much of the Trudeau era was defined by tension between Ottawa and the provinces and a lot of tension between Ottawa and the Premier of Alberta. This appears to be mending that relationship and changing the direction entirely. And then in terms of why it matters to the energy sector, I mean, for a long time now, Asian countries have been lining up and saying, we would love to take your energy. You just have to get it to us. And logistically, that was quite difficult. We had made some progress, but it was very limited. This seems like a real forward step in terms of realizing that goal and meeting that demand. And so I think across kind of all three aspects there, one, the 180 from Ottawa, two, collaborative federalism, and three, the impact on exports, it could potentially be a real game changer.
Well, you're calling it a game changer, but a lot of people actually aren't on board with this. BC Premier David Eby actually said that it could be an energy vampire, draining federal, provincial, and Indigenous resources. Here's what he said.
The pipeline proposal has no project proponent. There is not one private company that has stepped up to say, if you build it, we'll buy it. If the approvals are in place, we'll build it. Not one. It has no route. Currently, taxpayers, through the Trans Mountain Pipeline Corporation, are funding the development of the route. Not only does it not have permits, it doesn't even have a route. But the third thing it doesn't have is something that the Prime Minister said he believed was core in the House, in the federal parliament just recently, that First Nations agree and support projects before they will go forward through the Major Projects Office. And this project does not have the support of coastal First Nations. And that's important to us in BC because all of the projects that I outlined to you, those billions of dollars of investment, those thousands of jobs, depend as well on the support of coastal First Nations, whose support we do have for these projects. But the bottom line for us is that we need to make sure that this project doesn't become an energy vampire with all of the variables that have yet to be fulfilled. No proponent, no route, no money, no First Nation support, that it cannot draw limited federal resources, limited Indigenous governance resources, limited provincial resources away from the real projects that will employ people, provide the country with money that we desperately need, and provide investment and access to global markets to deepen our trade relationships overseas.
And opposition is growing along the coast. Coastal First Nations leaders say that they're prepared to mobilize their communities to block tankers from reaching northern waters.
This MOU does not override the rights and title of coastal First Nations on BC's North Coast, Central Coast, and Haida Gwaii. The honor of the Crown means the federal government must consult with us on a nation-to-nation basis, and Canada's domestic and international legal commitments mean they must seek our consent. We will never consent to allowing oil tankers in our coastal waters. We will never tolerate exemptions to an oil tanker ban that has existed for over 50 years, and it is foundational to protecting our economy and our way of life. A tanker ban is not a ban if it includes exemptions or carve-outs.
So, David, how significant is Premier David Eby's criticism calling this an energy vampire?
I mean, it comes at a really strange time because the recent polling on this show that 60% of Canadians are in favor. There is a groundswell of support for Canada being an energy superpower. I mean, we would be supplying the world with something that we have abundance of that they're asking for. And on that polling, it's just shy of 55% in BC support it. What the Premier is battling with here is that the people who oppose it are the people who vote NDP. And so he is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where, generally speaking, provincially, there is support for this. But within his own base and likely within his own caucus, there may not be. And so he has a tough line to try and walk. So it's significant in terms of we'll see what potential roadblocks or legal challenges BC could put up. It would really sour his position with the rest of the country if there's support for it. And he appears to be the kind of odd man out in opposing it.
Well, and as we just heard, coastal First Nations are vowing to stop tankers on the northern coast. Mm-hmm. How big of a hurdle could that be for this project?
So it's interesting because when we look at the map, there's a lot of misinformation that goes around. And so if we're looking at Prince Rupert, the way in which the export terminal works, right? Elizabeth May has said, well, we don't want tankers coming through the Hecate Strait. So if Haida Gwaii is here, which is an island, there's nothing that actually requires tankers to go through that strait. Mm-hmm. They go through the Dixon opening, which is at the north of that area. And so there's a growing question of what the people who oppose this are talking about, because there's nothing obliging any of these tankers to go through that strait. I mean, Elizabeth May went so far as to say it's one of the most dangerous waters in the world, which apparently is based off an article from an old paddling magazine for like recreational paddlers. So there's just a lot of strange misinformation here. And then on the other side, I mean, Andrew Scheer had said, well, we have U.S. tankers going along coastal waters, which is not really true. They're on the other side of Haida Gwaii. But for the most part, that would be where these tankers would be passing through to go to Asia anyway. So what this does in terms of the tanker ban, which is really what we're talking about, is it exposes a lot of people who are kind of spouting mistruths or half-truths about it. And when you look at the geography, it really is a pretty simple straight shot from the terminal through the Dixon Strait, not having to go through those protected waters at all. And I think as that information comes to light, more people are going to end up supporting the process than opposing it.
Culture Minister Stephen Guilbeault resigned from Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet to protest his government's new pact with Alberta on a proposed new pipeline. The environmentalist and longtime climate activist was the face of the previous Liberal government's ambitious climate agenda for more than half a decade. Liberal MPs reacted to the news of his leave.
A position I think Mr. Guilbeault is free to make. I think he's a man of principle. I've had the privilege of working alongside him since 2019. I think he has always, represented his values very strongly in this Parliament, continues to do so.
Does this hurt the credibility of Prime Minister Carney's environmental goals?
No, I believe I understand very well the Prime Minister's effort to balance, like his very strongly held environmental values as well, but also acknowledging concerns that exist right across the country. He's worked very closely with the provinces. I think what the Prime Minister has undertaken today was both necessary and appropriate.
So, David, this news actually caused some friction in Carney's own cabinet. How big of a political blow is that for Prime Minister Mark Carney to have Stephen Guilbeault leave?
I mean, Guilbeault endorsed Carney in the leadership race, so it is significant. But it's not surprising. I mean, as you mentioned, Guilbeault was the face of the Trudeau-era's climate policies. This reverses a good chunk of what he advocated for and what he legislated on for almost a decade. So it's not surprising that he's stepping away. It is strange that he's only leaving cabinet. And I think more questions will be asked of him moving forward, because if you don't want to be in cabinet because you're protesting this move, but you still want to be in the Liberal Party and be a member of Parliament. My assessment here is that this is part of a longer runway of him probably departing politics entirely. Just because if you are resigning from a cabinet position in protest, the next step of leaving politics entirely is not that far away. I do also find it interesting that, right, if we rewind 2 weeks, chaos in the Conservative Party, floor crosser, we have someone stepping down and leaving politics. How is Poilievre managing his caucus? Is he effective? I think now that conversation is going to shift over to the Liberals, because it won't just be Guilbeault. There are others who have been rumored. Jonathan Wilkinson, Karina Gold, reports on upwards of 5 who are those kind of Trudeau-era stalwarts. And so I think we will probably start to see a bit of an exodus of the old guard of the Trudeau era. And then that will be the question that Carney has to field is he effectively managing caucus and cabinet like he said he would? I mean, the answers to those questions will play out in time, but I think this will be the start of a larger trend.
And so you think with Guilbeault's leave, do you think that shows a little bit of tension within the Liberal Party and maybe things aren't as they seem?
Yes. And also tension within whom Mark Carney is himself, right? If you read Values, his book, it would be completely at odds with this decision. And so if we go back to 90s rap, will the real Slim Shady please stand up? Who is the real Mark Carney right now? There has to be an answer to it. Right? Is it the Mark Carney of Values? Maybe it is. But how do you square that with what just happened? If it's the Mark Carney of the Memorandum of Understanding, then that's great. And my own opinion is that moves the country in the right direction. But what was all that stuff before about? And I assume that there will be increased questions about who the real Mark Carney is moving forward, because that's the questions he's getting from his own caucus, right? Stephen Guilbeault doesn't endorse Mark Carney in the leadership race knowing that he's going to sign a memorandum of understanding on a pipeline with Danielle Smith. It wouldn't have happened. So this is almost where you can only speak out of out of both sides of your mouth for so long before people start to keep the receipts. And I think that's what's happening internally with Mark Carney, is he's having to make decisions that go against things that he advocated for and he said. That, I think, is going to spill over into the public realm, where people are going to say, wait a second, you were against this, now you're for it. You were for this, now you're against that. How do we square all of this? And so I expect in the coming months that to be a major conversation in both the Liberal Party and the country at large.
Now, if the project does move forward, what does that mean for Alberta's oil patch and Canada's export capacity?
Well, I mean, it would be huge. Like I said earlier, it's meeting demand from Asian markets, right? It's actually putting something behind the idea that we can be an energy superpower at a time where the economy is pretty much stagnant, wage growth is almost non-existent. So the economic opportunity, if there can be a private entity to spearhead this, is exponential. If there isn't a private entity to spearhead this and it becomes a public works project, well, then it's a little different. But we'll have until July to see whether or not that can be put together.